So now we move on to the next, characteristic, the balance of the Trudoshas. Mental health, this is the interesting, in Ayurveda has considered the body and mind as a continuum. And in the very first chapter in the commentary of Anunadatta, there is a description of how the body and mind are so interrelated, how what happens to the body affects the mind and vice versa. He says, Taptajya ghadayoriva. This is the relation between the body and the mind. Just like a ghee and a vessel. If you heat the ghee and pour into a cold vessel, the vessel will get heated. If you pour cold ghee into a hot vessel, the ghee will get affected. So it is impossible for the mind or the body to be not affected by what happens. So this is the model. Ayurveda understood this axis, mind-body axis and its continuity so many centuries ago. It's only in recent times that in modern science, this concept is coming. And the Tridosha Triguna concept is a perfect model of how to understand and predict these interactions. Because doshas are also having sattva, rajas, tamo gunas, and the gunas are also having an impact. It's not a one-to-one correlation. It's a complex correlation, but there is a pathway and connection. So when you control the mind, you can control the body. When you control the body, you can also control the mind. In fact, I have found, if you look at the Ayurvedic treatments for seriously severe mental illnesses, Ayurveda is actually only treating the body, not the mind. We do panchakarma. We do all the treatments and therapies. I think I'm not remembering the first part of that verse. Shuddha dehasya prasadam labhade mana. This is the first concept in mental illness treatment, that once the body becomes shuddha, mana prasada is automatically obtained. So the whole idea was that a disturbed mind poisons the body, and it's not possible to reach the mind. When the mind is already disturbed, you cannot counsel. One of a psychiatrist, my friend from Italy, when she came and observed in 𝐾𝐞𝐿, there is a mental government hospital which is doing good work. So she said she was surprised as to how a very violent person came in and the doctor did nothing but just put some oil on the head and made him sit there for some time, and gradually he quietened. And when she asked the doctor what you did, he said, this is, see, when the mind is in an aggressive mode, pitta will be aggravated. So if we treat pitta, then the mind will calm down a bit. Then we can counsel. To a pitta person, if you directly go and counsel, as long as a pitta is aggravated, you cannot handle him. So she said this was very fascinating. In an allopathic hospital, the approach would have been entirely different. So this understanding, and our idea is that I found that there are only few diseases where the whole of Panchakarma is described, like in infertility, in Kushtha. One of the diseases is Mano-rogas, where the whole Panchakarma is described. In infertility is needed because up to Shukradhatu needs to be corrected. So the whole idea of making the body completely clean so that, the dhatu. In Manas diseases also, full Shuddhi of the body is recommended. In all other diseases, we may do one or two types of Shuddhis or do the Pajana Shodhana. We may not do all the Panchakarma. This is, I think, because Ojas is the basis of the health. How does the body contribute to the mind? By offering Ojas. If the food is not fully transformed, Ojas is not fully produced, and the Manas is disturbed. Ahara Shuddhau, Sattva Shuddhi. This is a fundamental concept in our tradition. So if the food that you eat is not completely digested, your mind will not be calm. You cannot even sleep well if you have not digested your food. So in Ayurveda, we use the concept of Tridoshas. If the doshas are brought into balance and you do a complete Dhatupaka and Ojas is produced. In fact, this is what in Madatya it is very clearly mentioned. That Madhya is having gunas opposite to that of Ojas. Dashabhir dasha sankshobhya cheto nayati vikriyam. So when the body has, the food is having properties, what you consume inside has properties, Ushna, Ruksha, Tikshna, which are opposite to Ojas, that is when the mind gets disturbed. So in the first phase of treatment, you do Deha Shuddhi, then we do Deepana Bhasana, and we increase the Ojas of the person and then give medicines which improve Sattva Guna. Then the patient comes into a harmonious state. From there only you are actually addressing the mind directly. So this is the beautiful model of the Tridosha Triguna thing, which gives us some practical guidelines on how to approach a mentally ill patient. So well-developed prajna, we discussed, it is not enough to know, one must act upon what one knows, and one must also remember what one has learned. Emotional stability is actually what we say causes these shifts in personalities. An emotionally unstable person can undergo profound transformations in their personality. And I think many of these concepts of possession and these bhutas are related to emotional instability, because we can find certain emotions dominating in the personality of such individuals. Ability to nurture and sustain relationships. This is also a sign of good mental health. Of course, Ayurveda also says, Bhaktya Kalyana Mitrani Sevet Etare Duraga. You have to avoid people who may cause a lot of stress in your life. But on the whole, you have to have a very healthy kind of social relationship. And I think in Ayurveda, we have put it the extreme approach to diplomacy. Janasya āCāRA yo yatha paritushyati tam tadhaivanu varteda pararadhana pandita. Vagbhata almost says that you must become a worshipper of the others. Find out what will make them happy and then please them in that way. This is an advocacy of diplomacy to survive in the world. Of course, this is not fully based on Maitri or Karunya, but he even tells that you have to. But ultimately, he also gives an emphasis to, because in Sadvrta he says that this idea of social and spiritual relationships, there are studies which show also that people who do not have good social and spiritual relationships are easily getting mentally ill. He says that ardra santanada tyaga 𝐾𝐜𝐿 dama swartha buddhi parartheshu paryaptamidi sadvritam. If you were to explain Sadvrta in just one sentence, swartha buddhi parartheshu, being selfish for others, ardra santanada, melting, having that karunya, and then controlling your speech, thought and action. Being so careful that what you do will not affect people around you. This is the idea of mental health. Living in the world with complete awareness that what you do becomes a blessing for people around you more than even it becomes for yourself. This is a sign of mental health. So then comes the idea of mental balance and ability to cope and self-evolution and self-actualization. So I mentioned, now I'm going to try to explain some fascinating insights on what has been learned from modern psychology, especially psychosomatic medicine. We discussed now that in Ayurveda we say that the connection between body and mind is like that between ghee and the vessel. Now this is a perfect platform to talk about the Ayurvedic model of mind-body crosstalk. Now I have made a picture here which is representing how the body and mind is in a constant crosstalk. In Ayurveda we say when vata increases, kama, lobha, moha, kama, shoga, bhayad, vayuhu. So if you have certain emotions in the mind, then it will affect your physical body also. So this is the mind-body axis that has been described in Ayurveda. Krodhat pittam. So if you see here, pitta will create krodha, mada, malsarya. Pitta makes you, if there is an excess, it triggers rajas, and then it leads to sahasa, or extremely dangerous, adventurous acts, and also himsa, which is violence, and excessive thought, speech, and actions. Kapha causes vishada, or depression, and vata causes kama, lobha, moha, shoka, bhaya. And so this is a modeling of the body and mind which shows how this crosstalk happens. And I want to now come to this point that there is this modern concept of the PNEI axis, psycho-neuro-endocrino-immunological axis. As I was reading about it one day, it just suddenly struck me that this is the same, almost same concept. I don't want to really make a one-to-one correlation. I'm only talking about, how we can relate these two knowledge systems once we understand the foundational basis. I'm not really going to say that what modern science says as neurology is exactly, corresponding to something in Ayurveda, but there's definitely a correlation. The PNEI axis is talking about the crosstalk between the mind, the neurological, endocrinological, as well as immunological system. It means that a thought in your mind can be translated into effects that modulate your nervous system, your endocrine system, and your immunological system. If you love somebody and you just hug that person, oxytocin is produced in your system. I mean, it makes you very gentle and very loving, and you feel related to that person. So, a lot of research has happened into how the mind modulates the PNEI axis. And this is exactly what I'm trying to represent here. I think that this Tridosha, Triguna model in Ayurveda is a very old representation of what modern science from a biomolecular point of view is talking about the PNEI axis. Because in Ayurveda we have Manas with Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, and Vata, Pitta and Kapha. And in modern science they talk about psych and neuroendocrino-immunological. Although they are not exactly the same, we can definitely see a reflection of the neurological system in what Ayurveda understands as Vata. We can see a reflection of the endocrinological system in what Ayurveda understands as Pitta. We can see the reflection of the immunological system in what Ayurveda understands as Kapha. So Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems that talked about in the language of Trigunas and Tridoshas that there is a clear mind-body axis, and which in modern biomolecular, biomedical parlance, we understand today as the PNEI axis. So the PNEI innovative medical approach represents a paradigm shift from a strictly biomedical view of health. And this is exactly what we are trying to emphasize here, that medicine is starting to acknowledge that what they call as the tight coupling of the mind and body, and how thoughts, emotions and stress can trigger biochemical processes in your system. Just a thought can even affect your genes. I was reading about a study in which they looked at two groups of people based on their philosophy in life. This was so shocking. If a particular philosophy can affect your physical system, the way your genes behave. So there are two systems of philosophy according to Greek system, hedonism and eudaimonism. Hedonistic people are, the selfish, survival-oriented people who want to just, survive. They are only concerned about their survival. Eudaimonistic people who want to live for meaning, for some higher purpose in life. And they group. There are some challenges and limitations in this study, but the findings are kind of quite compelling. They looked at these two groups of people and then the expressions of genes that regulate inflammation. So they found that in hedonistic people with a hedonistic attitude to life, their pro-inflammatory genes are upregulated. People with a eudaimonistic approach to life, their pro-inflammatory genes are down-regulated. So this is the profound. So in Ayurveda, when we say hitahidam sukham dukkham ayustasya hitahidam, this also already incorporates the idea of hedonism and eudaimonism and tells that you must not only have a sukha life, but it should also be hitam. Otherwise, you cannot have a long life with good quality. So these are profound findings that are happening. There are studies which have shown that if you are just happy, your chemistry will completely change. Most of the people I have seen suffering from heart disease and is not just because of cholesterol or even obesity, it's because of stress. It's just because of stress, because endothelial dysfunction starts not just because more cholesterol accumulates in your system. It's because of so much, and one of the major reasons is the excess stress that happens in the system. So mental health is the basis for physical health. So body and soul cannot be separated for purposes of treatment, for they are one and indivisible. Sick minds must be healed as well as sick bodies. This is a statement from a Western specialist, Jeff Miller, but this really echoes what in Ayurveda has been described for centuries. So nutrition and mental health is equally important. In Ayurveda, we have, this is another aspect. Good nutrition creates good mental health. I think this is completely missing in modern society. I was at the Harvard Medical School a couple of years ago. Something really struck me there. The meeting was on how chronic pain can be resolved and whether Ayurveda can give an alternative. So it's interesting, the mayor of the city came there and he said, so I found that they were also curious and concerned. He said, opioid addiction and deaths related to opioid addiction is so much on the rise in the United States. So said, we need a solution. Do you think modern medicine has nothing to offer? They have opioids, but that is causing, these are also poison. So they create more depression and more kind of life-threatening situations come up in their life. They're frantically searching for alternatives. So Sadhguru was also there at that time, and I was struck by one statement that he made. He said, please stop eating tamasic food, because tamasic food makes you more addicted and makes you less tolerant of pain. So it's a vicious circle. America is one of the places in the world where they store food before they eat. All food is taken from stored containers. When some students from the US came to our hospital some months back, they were so excited. They're seeing plantains hanging from the shops there. Oh, we can pluck a plantain like from a tree. They were all excited and plucky, because in the United States, you see plantains wrapped in plastic covers moving, in conveyors on a supermarket, and they have never seen a plantain in real life. So everything is stored, cold stored. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that, ядayamam gadarasam pudi paryushitam chayat āCāRA tamasasya. Yadayama means one yama is gone after you prepare it. It becomes tamasic. We know there is a pranic energy also in the foods. We have not yet measured it. In Ayurveda, we always encounter ontological challenges because we look at things which are not also fully measurable. But even in modern medicine, if you want to transplant an organ, there is a time limit after the organ is harvested, before which you have to transplant it, because the pranic energy is lost after that, it will not be revived. So in Ayurveda, we say food, we are not against storing food. Ayurveda is also told to store rice for 1 year before we use it. So many foods are to be stored, but the method of storing is different. Here we activate the pranic energy of the food and then put it into cold storage, let all the prana go away, and then eat the dead body. It is the dead body of the food. It may be packed with nutrients, but it does not have the pranic energy that can activate your mind. This is something which I think should be researched. At this point of time, people may object to it by saying it's not scientific or it's still hypothetical, but I don't want to be bound by this. So in a previous talk, I clearly mentioned the difference in epistemology of Ayurveda and modern science. Ayurveda talks about Vyakta, Vyakta, Vyakta and Avyakta also. Modern medicine is mostly focused on Vyakta. What is Vyakta? Indriya Gochara. And also a little thing which is in the Vyakta, Vyakta, but it denies the reality of other. You can never measure certain things in the way modern science is doing it. So I want to keep myself open. I still think that these need to be further investigated. These are very interesting concepts. And that by changing the quality of your food. So this kind of mental nutrition is a new concept which I think Ayurveda can contribute. If we properly substantiate it with clinical studies. Today it's possible. I'm not saying that we must blindly say this is tamasic. We could do studies and understand the differences, because these are subtle concepts. You may not be able to concretely, but through proper outcome studies, we can show if there is a difference in people when you take a so-called tamasic food and a sattvic food. Does it have an impact on your mind? These things can be kind of studied. And America is also one of the countries where people are very, very easily getting into addictions. This is because their state mind becomes very easily tamasic because of the food that they eat. So even though there may be a little bit of exaggeration in this, the message that was given was, if you change your food habits, you will have better pain tolerance and less addiction. Now these are points, direct points, which give us a new direction and which is inspired by Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, in Madhya, this model is very clearly described. I was always intrigued by where is the seat of the mind in Ayurveda. When I was a student, when I looked at the brain, I was so fascinated with modern medicine that I thought this is a mistake. Hridayam. It took a long time for me to understand that Ayurveda has never really placed the mind in the heart. When I was reading the Charaka Samhita, I came across in Kathita Purushiyam, Achetanam Kriyavacha Manaha. Now that was a revelation. Manas is Achetanam and Hridayam is said to be Chetana Sthanam. So if Hridayam is Chetana Sthanam, how can the Achetana Manas be there? So Manas is Indriya and the Indriya Sthana is Shiras. Prana pranabhradam yatra shrita sarvendriyani cha yaduttamanga mangasya shirastada bidhiyate. So this idea of mind is matter. They say what is mind doesn't matter, what is matter never mind. But here it is not like that. It does matter. The mind and matter is at a lower plane. Both are not conscious. The self is conscious and it is the self that is located in the you. Because when you say I keep my hand here only. I never say I. So we know intuitively that our idea of self, and that is what is figuratively mentioned in Ayurveda as Hridayam Chedanastha. So this is a very interesting distinction I understood when I looked at. So now it became very clear that Hridayam is Chedanasthanam and Shiras is the Sthana of Manas. But the texts in the context of Madhya, it clearly says Hridayam is the sthanam of Rasam. Rasam is the Adhara of Ojas. And Ojas is the support of the mind. And that is why when Hridayam is affected, because the Rasa gets affected, when Rasa is affected, the Ojas gets affected. When the Ojas gets affected, the mind also gets affected. This is why we consider the heart to be also the basis of your mind. Because if the heart shuts down, your brain will also shut down. So that physical connection has also been so beautifully explained in the classical Ayurvedic texts. So this model of how physically the heart supports the mind, as well as this distinction between mind and consciousness, is very clearly mentioned in Ayurvedic texts. So to conclude, I would like to say that in Ayurveda, we have a multi-pronged approach to creating mental health, which involves thought engineering, lifestyle, diet, medicines and therapies. And this is the beauty of it, because it is all comprehensive. Right from self-care to primary care to secondary care to tertiary care. Ayurveda has that entire armamentarium of interventions and tools that we can use to create and support mental health. Now there are some other very interesting findings of how we really, damage our mental health. Is because of this erratic lifestyle, especially the way we travel. We are all victims of that, and where we disturb our sleep-wake patterns. We have not realized what a profound effect it can have on your mental health. So, increased activity during rest hours or inactivity during the day. There are studies which have shown that this is a real cause for mood disorders. And this is becoming more and more rampant in our society. I think we need to really teach our people how to withdraw and take rest and sleep well in order to be. So today, especially this target-oriented, achievement-oriented, culture in schools, in colleges, in workplaces, this is taking its toll on human health, and it's actually reducing our productivity in the long run. It is like, the story of the goose that lays golden eggs. I mean, just to you make a short-term harvest, we are destroying the individual. So we need to keep this should become part of occupational, now people talk about ergonomic sitting positions and other things, but it's still not extended to mental health. We need to bring in rules at the workplace which will help people to preserve their mental health. Unless we do that, today the biggest threat to mental health is our workplace, the teaching place, schools. This is where this needs to be really improved. And even children should be allowed to sleep well. And not be loaded with too much of learning should become much more an activity of discovery, happiness, rather than a stress to perform in an exam and create all this. All the six ripus or emotions are triggered in these environments. Who gets the first rank, who gets 0.5% more or less. So children at a very young age are brought into this whole hostile kind of environment. And so they found that slower reaction times, worse subjective feelings of well-being, that I am not good or I am deficient. This is continuously, hammering the individual at the back of the mind, and this is found to be a very big challenge in mental health. And just taking some tranquilizers or mood stabilizers is not going to be a solution in the long run. Meditation is another very important activity. In all olden cultures, people have found that religiousness, spirituality, in certain contexts, they have found it to be advantageous. Now, is it because there is God, or I don't believe in it, because in India, we never even discussed whether God exists or not. Astika, Nastika is not about God. It's wrongly translated as theist and atheist. Astika, Nastika means whether we are existing or not. That is the question. It's not about whether God exists or not. Whether after I die, I will exist or not. If I exist, then I must think about God. If I don't exist, it doesn't matter. So we were very practical. So people have wrongly understood that we debated upon. Actually, I was so thrilled when I got this insight. I realized, in those days, they were really debating on a fundamental existential problem. What will happen after death? Will I survive or not? And based on that, they took two different philosophies in life. If those who believed that I won't survive in life, they created another way of life. And those who believed that I will survive after life, they began to plan for the life after that. And God and all those things came later, because some of the Astika Darshanas also don't believe in 𝐸𝐴RA. And even the word God is not easily translatable as 𝐸𝐴RA. So, but the thing is, religious, spiritual people have found to be better mentally healthy in some, not always. Sometimes they can also be very mentally ill. The way they relate to the religion is important. But there are certain advantages. They become more stable, they are having better ability to cope, because there is definitely a psychological advantage in surrendering yourself to some higher power, hoping that better things will happen in the future. It makes you more optimistic, makes you better cope, have better social kind of relationships when you are in a religious community. So meditation is actually very helpful. There was a study which showed sleep disorders, people who meditated and who did not, and there was a clear indication that the more you meditate, the more you are able to sleep, because meditation and sleep are actually very close. If you sleep without awareness, it is sleep, and if you sleep with awareness, it is meditation. It's so close. So, and they also found that these practices have definite changes on your brain. The mind, whether the mind is in the brain or the brain is in the mind, is a difficult question to answer. But it's quite evident that what happens in the brain affects the mind and vice versa. Today, neurologists say there is something called neuroplasticity. Means the brain is more plastic than we thought about. It can change, rewire itself. So if you read Sanskrit, not only Sanskrit, maybe many of these ancient languages, if you chant regularly, if you read those alpha syllables, which are different alphabets, certain parts in your brain are getting activated. The hippocampus is becoming larger. These things are definitely happening. It's being better mapped today. So meditation, like if you practice yoga, for some time, then GABA, which is a chemical that your body own produces, it's your self-produced anti-anxiety medicine. GABA increases. So 27% GABA production increases. There's a study which reported. So maybe all of them are not exceptionally good yoga practitioners. So these results also vary on how well you practice yoga. So the more and more you get trained in yoga and better you do it, you could really reach to a stage where you are not anxious. So these are the things I think that we can, with these elements, we can put together a program in Ayurveda which gives you another model of mental health, and also a set of practices that can actually be applied in society. So many interesting changes are happening, and I believe that we are losing this advantage. Autophagy, chronobiology, there are many ways in which Ayurvedic concepts have reincarnated in the modern scientific environment. The idea that food and mind are related is also coming into modern nutritional psychiatry. So a very large body of evidence now suggests that diet is as important to mental health as it is to physical health. This has been an underlying concept in Ayurveda, and we should have been the people who should have announced this to the modern world. Instead, we started studying all mental problems, Shankapushpi or Brahmi, we are giving to rats and extracting and still fiddling around with psychopharmacology when we have much deeper and more profound concepts and ideas to convey. A healthy diet is protective and an unhealthy diet is a risk factor for depression and anxiety. That's now become an established scientific finding. So even the gut microbiome, are said to actually affect the mind. So even Agni is so important for mental health, which according to Ayurveda is one of the foundational, basis for not only physical but also mental health. Now another point I want to say is that where we could help society is Ayurveda can proffer safer alternatives. I think this is an area where we must work. Alternatives to psychotropic drugs. We can reduce the use of many modern psychotropic drugs if we carefully bring Ayurvedic interventions in psychiatric practice. In our own hospital of our university, the allopathic hospital, I met with the psychiatrist, and he was telling me that in depression now he gives Ayurvedic oils in stage 1 and stage 2. Because he says that it's dangerous to put the patients on antidepressant. Only if the Hamilton scale depression shows severe degree, stage 3 depression, only then he gives an antidepressant. So in stage 1 and stage 2, he says by integrating Ayurveda, he's able to prevent misuse of antidepressants. In fact, a very famous psychiatrist from the US, Irvin Kirsch, and his colleagues came to the conclusion that there is very little evidence to support the prescription of antidepressant medications to accept the most severely depressed patients. There's no use of giving antidepressants. Do antidepressants work? Yes, no, and yes again. The more depressed you are, the more likely you will benefit from antidepressants. So it means that you need to take an antidepressant only if you are really mentally ill. Otherwise, there is no use. It doesn't really work. So these are areas where Ayurveda can offer a lot of alternatives. So if you bring a host of, it's a very potential area where we can integrate with modern psychiatry. Natural psychotropic herbs and reduce the use of modern strong psychotropic herbs is an area where even modern psychiatrists are slowly beginning to explore. We had a very interesting discussion at the University of Milan with one of the psychiatrists there, and she was also very open to looking at these alternatives. Now it's quite a coincidence, or maybe irony or paradox, that it's people outside India that have discovered the potential of Ayurveda in helping people with mental illnesses. Many years ago, a Japanese scientist came to the institution where I worked, and he said, would you all be interested in what I have made? It's a robot to do Shirodhara. I must say that today we have robotics in medicine. I don't know if I'm sure, but I even suspect that this is perhaps robotics in medicine for a therapy was first used in Ayurveda by a Japanese doctor, even before it came to modern medicine. I doubt that, because he used a robot which could perform Shirodhara in a controlled way and also measure what changes happen when Shirodhara is performed. And he proposed for the first time on the basis of the observations that when done under controlled conditions, Shirodhara is able to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and induce an altered state of consciousness that is deeply relaxing and rejuvenating for the mind. So these are possibilities. I mean, there's a lot of possibility to even bring in technology and modernize Ayurvedic interventions, although it's quite an expense. I don't think we really need robos also, but maybe some of these models could demonstrate the benefits of such treatments. And I hinted this before, there is a strong desire and aspiration, at least in a small group of people in India, some of them from outside, how to develop a new discipline of deep psychology, an alternate paradigm and framework for psychology based on the Indian knowledge systems like Ayurveda. When I was asked, is there psychology in Ayurveda? I said no. There is no psychology in Ayurveda. But Ayurveda is all about the mind. Because we never studied the mind separately. That is why, and I said the problem is that there is psychology. The problem with modern knowledge is that there is psychology. So let us not create Ayurvedic psychology. Because Ayurveda, in Kaya we included the mind. That is the beauty of Ayurveda. We did not separate the mind and the body. We did not need a separate branch of psychology. We said mind is understood only when it separates from the body, we study it individually. So there is psychiatry, there is no psychology. Because psychology is in a healthy individual. It is Atma Vidya. When you study yourself, when you look at the mind from yourself, it is health. When you look at the mind from your body, it is when you're diseased that you look at it that way. So this is a new movement that is coming in. And there are already some literature which I'm showing in the slides, which if somebody is interested, they could look up these resources to see how this new thought process. A lot of these people behind this movement are psychiatrists, some of them with a lot of international experience, and also from other diverse fields like humanities, and even computer scientists are interested because they're confronting these kind of mental challenges in the workplace and in their profession. So in conclusion, we can say that Ayurveda offers a comprehensive multidimensional concept of mental health. The mind-body continuum and bidirectional crosstalk is a central theme in the Ayurvedic understanding of mental as well as physical health. We never really separated the two. We took care of both. And creating and sustaining mental health requires a multi-pronged strategy, which includes mind engineering, lifestyle, diet, medicines, and therapy. Only when we bring all these things together, we are able to harvest what we call as mental health. And there is a need to develop theoretical translation and application frameworks and strategies to make this knowledge accessible to society. And I think we have, in our tradition, most of our spiritual texts have very deep concepts about human mind and psychology. We need to deconstruct it from that religious framework and bring it into actual application. And I think Ayurveda would play the key role because, what we find in those texts are more philosophical and more, abstract. But in Ayurveda, it has all been brought into the context of human life in actual clinical practice. So Ayurveda could be the platform through which we can create an alternative paradigm for mental health and an alternative and more comprehensive approach to make our lives more fulfilling, happy, and transformative. Thank you.